I'm Dr. Kate Evans, and I set up and work for Elephants for Africa, which is a research project based in the Okavango Delta in Botswana on elephants.
And what is the mission of Elephants for Africa?
It's to ensure the ongoing research that we've set up. It's been going for 7 years, but also get involved with educational projects for Botswana nationals. We've got a scholarship programme for local students, and we're going to move into schools and get schools out on trips and things like that. So really the conservation and future protection of the Botswana elephants and the education of conservation within the schools and within the graduates of Botswana.
And can you say more about what the research focus of Elephants for Africa is?
It started off, and the main focus for myself is male biology, both social biology and also environmental biology. So what are the requirements of male elephants? A lot of work's been done on females, but actually males have not been forgotten, but there's still a lot of information we need to get. And where I am, it's mainly a bull area, so it's an ideal place to look at bull behaviour. And that's what I do. We've been focused particularly on adolescent male elephants, so when they leave their herd and become independent, that process, how they're doing it and how they're becoming integrated into bull society.
And what kinds of things are you finding?
Well, I think it's fascinating, but what we found is until fairly recently, old bulls were seen as surplus once they were past sort of their mating prime, but actually males of all ages prefer to be closer to the biggest and oldest male within their group. So, why is this? Is it protection from for the old bulls? They feel a bit vulnerable because they're so old? But where we are, there's very little anthropomorphic effect, so they rarely come across humans. So that's the only.
When you say anthropomorphic effect, that means humans?
Yes. There's.
Sorry, can I just cut in? Just try to create gaps.
Yeah, understood.
There's very few humans in the delta itself. It's a designated wildlife area. There are humans around the outside, so I doubt they feel very threatened from humans, so that's the only species they really need to worry about. So I'm more inclined to think that it's the young bulls learning from these older bulls, somehow gathering information from these bulls that have been there for 40, 50 years and have a wealth of information about where the good food is, where the good water sources are.
And are Botswana elephants under threat from humans? So repeat the question about humans.
The elephants in Botswana represent a very healthy population. It's actually the largest population in the world, thought to be the largest population left in the world of the savanna elephant, and an estimated 120 to 150,000 elephants. So there's little poaching, and there's conflict when it comes to human-elephant conflict, crop raiding. But actually Botswana has little agriculture because it is pretty much a desert outside of the delta. And so Botswana's elephants represent a wild population. Elephants for Africa supports some education initiatives within Botswana, one of which is the Boys Zero Scholarship Fund, to enable graduates to undertake their postgraduate degrees through the project and through the University of Bristol and or the University of Botswana. We feel there's a real gap between postgraduate researchers and wildlife departments, so we want to bridge that gap by enabling and training local students.
And how are those local students identified?
We have an interview process, and we've interviewed a lot of people, and we've got our first student, Mpweng, and he's doing really well. He'll hopefully start in February 2009.
And where does the money come to support these students?
We do a lot of fundraising, and private donors are encouraged to sponsor the student, and also we apply for grants, and he's busy applying for local grants. We're hoping that there's governmental grants within Botswana that will support him as well.
So if you are appealing to fundraisers, to private donors, what's the kind of message you want to get out to them?
When it comes to conservation within Africa, we really need local involvement, and we feel that local involvement can help if we've got trained individuals. So by sponsoring a graduate student through our scholarship programme, you are really looking at the future conservation of Botswana and her wildlife. Elephants for Africa supports local students through their scholarship fund, and we feel this is a real good initiative to enable local students to be empowered and trained when it comes to conservation management of Botswana's wildlife. Many people come and enjoy Botswana's wildlife, but if we're going to see it there in the future, we need to invest in the local students and in the local people. So by sponsoring a student, you really are investing in the future of Botswana and her wildlife and her elephants.
How much does Botswana depend on tourism for its economy?
Botswana's economy is hugely dependent on the tourism, and by tourism I mean through wildlife especially. It's the second largest income for Botswana after diamonds. So without wildlife and without these wilderness places, the wealth of Botswana would be hugely affected. And until recently it was thought that adolescent males left their herd, became independent, and that was it. They led a bull life. But what researchers are finding out now is that bull society is actually really complex, and if young bulls don't have older bulls present in their population, then their behaviour becomes very, very different from what it should be. They come into must a lot earlier, and by must I mean they have a huge surge of testosterone, which, as we know, can affect behaviour. And in parks where there has been no adult bulls whatsoever, they've shown really unusual aggressive behaviour, attacking rhinos and other elephants. So what we now know is that actually if you're going to have bulls, you need a stable bull society, and by that I mean you need bulls of all ages to integrate and to act out a natural system.
And is there any kind of individual psychological component to this, or is it really strictly connected to between testosterone and aggression?
We don't know the fundamentals of it yet. We're busy trying to understand more about bull society and what are the triggers. But what we think is it's a mix of behaviour, of how these older bulls react to younger bulls and vice versa, and also pheromonal, so chemical communication. Must is a very powerful chemical state, and that is going to have not only physical attributes if they see that elephant, but also smell. If the elephant is miles away, they're going to know that that bull is in must. And so there's some sort of control within bull society through this must process and through chemical communication as well as behaviour. So I'm much bigger than you, and if I fight you, I'm going to win. So it's a combination of both. It's very sort of subtle, and we're slowly breaking down what the fundamentals are.
And you mentioned there's been incidents of younger male elephants attacking rhinos, is that right?
Yeah, and the prime example of young males attacking rhinos was in the Pilanesberg National Park in South Africa, which is Rob Slotto's work. They introduced young bulls without having older bulls present, and what they think happened is they came into must prematurely and were looking for something to mate. There was no available adult female, so that something became a rhino, next big grey thing. And obviously the rhinos weren't interested and didn't behave properly, and this turned into aggressive encounters, and 48 or nearly 50 rhinos were actually killed, which we all know rhinos are very endangered, so you can't afford to lose one, let alone nearly 50.
Can you think of any anecdotal stories about that happening? Did you see it or anything?
No, I didn't see it. No.
Still a good story.
That's a great story. So, do you think we can say that elephants have culture?
Culture, define culture.
Well, you define it for me.
Culture, I believe, if you're looking at elephants and humans, is the transfer of information and transfer of knowledge from one generation to the next. And yes, I do think elephants do transfer knowledge. With females, the matriarchs are the repositories of that knowledge. Knowledge being where's a good place to go, where's danger, where in times of severe drought will we find water. And they may have only gone there once when they were a calf, maybe 2, 3, 4 years old, and never had to go back to that situation. But in severe drought comes along and they have to, somewhere in their memory banks, go, okay, my mother took me there, and off they go. And in doing so, they teach their herd where that vital source of water is available. Now, what we're finding in bulls is this this wealth of knowledge are in these older bulls. So that transfer of knowledge, we think, is occurring between bulls of different ages as well. Because what happens when a bull leaves his herd, he not only leaves the social structure of that herd, but he also enters into different areas that he's never been before. So he has no knowledge about water resources, food resources. So the quick way of learning is tagging on to a big adult male that has that information already, just following him around.
And what do we know about the traditional migratory routes or elephants in Botswana? Has that changed over time?
Botswana in the early 19th century was decimated pretty much of a lot of its wildlife, and so what happened, it was all pushed up to the northern part of Botswana, which the majority of the wildlife is still there. But due to the Okavango Delta and its flooding, so it's a very difficult environment to live in, and also because of sleeping sickness, it stopped cattle movement into this wildlife area. But now what we're seeing is an increase in population, a healthy increase in population, and what we think is happening is they're returning to their old stomping grounds as such. And it's just through historical data where we know elephants were found. Nothing scientific, but this is what we have to rely on. And recently they've been migrating back or moving back into areas such as Mahadi and along the Pateti River, because now we have water back in that river. It was dry for a very long time. So whether they're relearning these new routes or that information has been passed down, that would be very difficult to prove. But there is an expansion of habitat within Botswana.
So there would be no, if this information is passed from generation to generation, given the historical time frame, would there be any memory within these elephant communities of these previous areas where they used to inhabit?
From a historical point of view and from what elephants would remember, I think a lot of that has already been lost. I think those matriarchs have passed away. So these elephants may have to relearn migratory routes unless, and we don't know, the elephants are able to pass that information on without ever being there. We presume that learning that transfer of information is through doing and showing rather than teaching.
Can I ask a question? So you wouldn't say that elephants create traditions, like local traditions, between one community knowing one thing and another knowing something else about food sources? Or?
With elephants, they have their herds and then they have clan and bond groups. So a matriarch may be related to another matriarch within another herd. So it's likely that they actually share information across herds because there is that genetic incentive to share that information. How far that goes within a clan, I'm not sure. And when it comes to bulls, it could be, from a genetic point of view, important to keep certain information so that you're the strongest bull. Because actually, if you're a bull elephant, you want to be the biggest and strongest bull so you can win most of the females. So how much transfer of knowledge is sort of imparted knowingly to unrelated bulls is very difficult to answer, but a very interesting point.
And as there's increasing land use change in not only in Botswana but in all of Africa, and these migratory routes change, the habitat areas that these elephants used to know, they're no longer accessible to. Does that affect the vulnerability of these communities, of these elephant communities?
The conflict between humans and elephants is increasing through space and competition over space. With migratory routes, there is a huge instinct for an elephant to keep following those routes. And if human habitation goes across those routes, then that's where the conflict is of the highest. And what researchers across Africa are trying to find is the important migratory routes, so we could designate them wildlife areas and hopefully maintain those migratory routes, because it really is a very powerful instinct for elephants to use those routes. The prime example is Kariba Dam. When it was flooded, elephants started swimming across miles and miles of water because that was their old migratory route. And humans tried to stop them, thinking they wouldn't be able to get from A to B, and they'd sort of herd them back to the other bank, and the elephants would go across again. So even when there's masses of water in the way, there's still that instinct to get across.
And you say it's an instinct to get it along these migratory routes. So is there a sense that elephant migration is similar to bird migration or other animal migrations? Or is this also these routes passed down through knowledge between generations?
The migratory routes of elephants depends where in Africa you are, but there does seem to be the transfer of knowledge between older females and their younger females. Why they do that, I'm sure it's just due to seasonal changes in habitat availability and food availability. There may be certain minerals that aren't accessible in habitat A, so they have to move to habitat B to get those.
So these migratory routes are really kind of built on long generations of memory, would you say?
The migratory routes of elephants seems to be historical, yeah, that they have used those routes in the past and they want to continue using those routes.
What about, like in the Okavango Delta where you are, there's trying to create these transfrontier conservation areas and allow them to restore their old migration routes? Do you want to describe a bit about that?
Botswana, I speak of Botswana's population, but actually it's a huge population that can go between Zimbabwe, Zambia, Angola and Namibia, and indeed does. We believe that historically they used to do more of that sort of transfrontier boundary movement, and now that some of the countries have settled after long wars, such as Angola, there does seem to be a movement of elephants back into those areas. So by establishing transfrontier parks, we're hoping that those elephants can go back to what they used to do, i.e. move between these countries freely.
And do they recognize national boundaries?
Well, yes. I mean, I don't think an elephant wakes up in the morning and think, I'm a Botswanan elephant. I'm proud to be Botswanan. We humans tend to have this fascination with different countries, but on a continent as large as Africa, there's nothing stopping elephants or humans moving around. So I don't think they show any respect for our international boundaries. What they do show respect for is changes across those boundaries. For example, Mozambique, Angola has had civil war and they've used mines, for example. So elephants learn that those countries aren't necessarily very safe to go into. So their behaviour changes within the different countries that they're in. Botswana's relatively safe, so they are probably very happy there, getting around doing their business. As soon as they go across the border, they know that the risk stakes have gone up, so they tend to be a lot more cautious.
And how do they know when it's changed, when it's become a more friendly environment?
That's through learning, I think. Elephants are very cautious, particularly females. They have their youngsters to protect. So they're not going to know that civil war or unrest has stopped and suddenly go back to going back in there. What they know is that it's a dangerous place. So over time, they'll slowly reinstigate and re-explore these areas, but it will take time. What I find interesting is the similarities between humans and elephants in that respect, that you've got certain communities nowadays without the influence of old elders, particularly male mentors for young males. AIDS, for example, is wiping out a generation, and you're having lots of young males growing up without the influence of their fathers or uncles or someone within the community to look up to respect, to discipline. And we see that young males without those elders within their communities, without these older bulls within their society, show very different behaviour, for want of a better word, delinquent behaviour, aggressive behaviour that doesn't normally occur within bull society.
Can you give an example of that?
The prime example is Pilanesberg National Park, so I can go back again to that.